Recently, there has been a shift in the discourse regarding how people view George Lucas, the creator of Star Wars. And this has got me thinking more broadly how fans and artists view art and entertainment. For the longest time, artists were taken for granted, and the populist perspective was the prevailing narrative. Hell, there was even a documentary called The People versus George Lucas, and most of the discourse around Star Wars is framed through this lens. Many of the people who trash talk the prequels and the special editions of the original trilogy seem to talk about Star Wars from a quote-unquote fan perspective, as if they are speaking on behalf of the quote-unquote people, even though a lot of the time they have petty grievances that are not so unanimously agreed upon by the Star Wars fan base. The narrative is that they are the army of average Joes fighting against the evil dictator tyrant rich man who wants to ruin their childhood.
George Lucas raped our childhood. George Lucas raped our childhood.
And just so I'm not completely biased here, since I am a prequel enjoyer and a sequel hater, the same was also true with the sequel trilogy to a lesser extent. Some of the same fans were also getting angry with J.J. Abrams and Rian Johnson, as if they were playground bullies who had taken their toys away, even though this is exactly what, quote-unquote, the people wanted to begin with. They wanted George Lucas removed from the equation and to have the people's Star Wars, and they got just that. It was called The Force Awakens. Now, I actually think these three directors represent the three perspectives on fandoms and art in general. 1. George Lucas represents the artist perspective, that the artist is a visionary and that they should be able to preside over their creation with absolute sovereignty, that they should not be forced to cater to the fans' whims whatsoever. They can do whatever they want with their art. 2. J.J. Abrams represents the fan perspective, the populist narrative.
In fact, J.J. Abrams should have directed the prequels, and George Lucas should have directed people to their seats in the theater.
Amazing. Every word of what you just said was wrong.
His movie, The Force Awakens, was a reaction against the artist perspective, that the will of the people should dictate what is done with Star Wars, that works of creation should be more democratic with less top-down control from the visionary. From this perspective, the visionary is out of touch, and the average Joe is better suited to know what's best for the franchise. 3. Rian Johnson represents the killjoy perspective. This view has utter contempt for both the artist perspective and the fan perspective. I call this the killjoy perspective because it truly is against fun. The killjoy does not want the fan nor the artist to enjoy themselves whatsoever. The killjoy seems to interpret art in one of two ways, both of which are applicable to The Last Jedi. Either A. The killjoy is a nihilist and believes that art is meaningless. This is reflected by Old Man Luke, or Jake Skywalker as the fans like to call him, who is clearly a vessel for Rian Johnson's contempt for the fans and for Star Wars itself. Or B. The killjoy is an ideologue who believes that art is merely a Trojan horse for propaganda, and he puts the message before the medium. This is evident with the inexplicable anti-capitalism subplot shoved into the movie, as well as the clearly intentionally provocative gender politics of the film. These things make absolutely no sense in the context of the universe of the film itself, and the only way to view them as anything coherent is to view them as breaking the fourth wall and just acknowledge that it is blatant propaganda. With these three perspectives in mind, we can now see how the discourse around Star Wars has transitioned significantly over the last 25 years. The prequels were films made from the artist's perspective. They were films the visionary wanted to actualize, And as a reaction to this, both the populists and the killjoys alike were a united front in opposition to George Lucas. The populists not liking the direction of the series and demanding that the fans be given control over future projects, and the killjoys simply like hating things. However, when George Lucas sold Star Wars to Disney, the populists had got what they wanted. The Force Awakens was not a film made by a visionary. It was one made by committee. A movie designed to cater to the demands of the fans. At this point, most of the populists were happy, but the killjoys were not, because they never are, and these two groups turned on one another. The killjoys usurped the franchise, and the result was The Last Jedi. Once again, feeling displaced, the populist group went back to their old script, but this time, instead of the people versus George Lucas, it became the people versus Rian Johnson. They mistook Rian Johnson for another visionary and attacked him just like Lucas. In this game of tug-of-war, the populists struck back, and J.J. Abrams was brought back to make the final chapter of the sequel trilogy. The Rise of Skywalker is the populist perspective reacting to the killjoy perspective, which is why Luke has a 180-degree character shift and speaks as if he is speaking to Rian Johnson directly and specifically.
A Jedi's weapon deserves more respect. A Jedi's weapon deserves more respect.
The sequel trilogy is a train wreck, the civil war of the fandom on full display. It is inconsistent and contradictory, and this has made some appreciate the artist perspective. Even if J.J. Abrams had directed all three sequels, it's very clear they would still be complete garbage. So there is a lesson to be learned from all this. What if the sequel trilogy were made by a visionary? What if episodes 7, 8, and 9 had all been made by George Lucas? We can't know for sure, but I am completely confident that at the very least, it would have been significantly better than what we got. I myself had formerly been in the populist camp in the past. However, I have grown to dislike the populists just as much as the killjoys. I now stand firmly with the artist perspective. Screw the fans. The fans don't know what makes good art. The reason we have so much slop entertainment is because it is appealing to the lowest common denominator. Everything has to be completely unchallenging to the average Joe. Star Wars, left entirely up to the fans, would at best produce The Mandalorian over and over again on repeat. Forgettable slop that exits your mind the second that the TV is off. Not anything memorable that sticks with you. I have accepted that Star Wars is over. I no longer await its redemption with some cool new thing in the future. I'll simply cherish the 6 good Star Wars movies and leave it at that. However, I do want other new things. I want a renaissance. I want bold new art. Stuff that initially offends the normies, but later on becomes a pop culture sensation. That's what Star Wars was. It was really weird, and yet so great. And not just the prequels, the original trilogy was also very weird, but in a good way. They were the creation of a visionary, not a corporate committee, not the cynical deconstruction of a misanthrope, and certainly not the so-called brilliance of all the plebs who have hijacked this ship full of treasure and have plunged it into the depths of the ocean, all while fighting over the wheel. This is how the Star Wars fandom died, and it has made me an artistic radical. The populists and the killjoys should be ignored, and artists should have complete freedom to offend their sensibilities. May there be many George Lucases in the future who dismiss the concerns of the plebs. Our acculturation continues.